Hello, historians, and welcome back to another edition of the Renaissance and the Reformation. And this is lesson 5.2, so this will be your guided notes for 5.2. And in this particular lesson, we'll be looking at ideas and art of the Renaissance. So let's get started. All right, so these are your standards that we're going to be looking at. The main standard that I want you to focus on is this one: being able to identify the major artistic, literary, and technological contributions of people of the Renaissance. And that's pretty much what we're looking at here. Okay. All right, so let's continue. These are the essential questions. How can ideas be represented in art and sculpture and literature? And those ideas, how did that transfer from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance, and then this renewal of knowledge during the scientific revolution? So we're kind of connecting the dots here. All right. So let's get started and continue. All right, so your first question and your second questions in this particular highlighted portion, it asked what was secularism? And secularism is being separate from religion or having no religious basis. Okay, but the next question asked about how the difference or what happened in terms of the Renaissance. And basically art and intellect or scholarship basically was separated from religious basis or religious standpoints, and now focusing on human individualism, or looking within the human construct and the human ability. Okay, and that was called Renaissance humanism. All right. So your answer for number 2 is within the actual secularism. So they moved from religious basis or divine basis into secularism. Okay, so hopefully you got that for number 2. All right, so these are your number 3, 4, and 5 questions. Okay. Humanism is the system of thought or philosophy that is attached to importance of the human matters rather than divine or supernatural matters. So again, that Renaissance humanism that I just mentioned before, that's what humanism is. It's a philosophy, it's a system of thought where instead of focusing on Christianity at that time, they focused on human matters, real human down-to-earth matters. Okay, and their humanism was based on doing a throwback. Okay, they literally did a throwback to the classics of ancient Greece and Rome. During the medieval times or the Middle Ages, they focused on the Bible and they got all the information from the Bible. In this case, they're not so much dependent on the Bible. Now they're looking to ancient Greece and Rome, and they're studying grammar, they're studying rhetoric, they're studying philosophy, they're studying poetry and history from antiquity, from ancient Greece and Rome. And today, that is called the humanities, which is what you're studying right now. Okay. Now, unlike the Middle Ages, like I said, where they focused on the Bible mainly, they used Greek and Roman texts to support their ideas, support even their religious writings. Okay, so they turned to these classics or to antiquity to revitalize their culture. Okay, so that would be your answer for number 5. Okay, so 3, 4, and 5. All right, let's continue. So the father of Italian humanism, and if you have this person, or if you selected this person as your project for your role, then awesome. This is when we're going to talk about Francesco Petrarch. He was a 14th century humanist and also a poet, a writer, and he started, and that would be answer for number 6, I believe. So he started the development of Italian Renaissance humanism. Okay, and the way he started that is searching for Latin manuscripts and focusing on classic Latin, right, rather than the medieval Latin that was used to write with. Okay, so most medieval writings was in that form of Latin. However, he searched through a lot of Latin manuscripts from the past, right? And started writing in that fashion. So that started this trend of focusing on the individual, and now he's considered the father of Italian Renaissance humanism. He was quite isolated from the community, as most 14th century humanists were, but 15th century humanists, right, which is 1400s, they believe that civic service, meaning that you serve your community, that's a duty. That's something as a humanist, as a scholar, as an educated person, that's what you should be doing for your society, that you should be serving your community. And that's what 15th century humanists started to do. Whereas 14th century humanists like Petrarch just kind of stuck to themselves. Okay, so hopefully you got that. So this would have been, I think this is 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so vernacular. Actually, this is question number 8. This is 8, and this would be 9. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, Petrarch, right? We mentioned Petrarch before. Petrarch started to write in classic Latin, right? So that term, classic Latin, or the language that was spoken in a particular region, is called vernacular, okay? So mainly scholars and humanists started writing in vernacular, which was the classic Latin, which became popular in Italy, okay? And those Renaissance writers that started writing in vernacular was Francisco Petrarch, Dante Alighieri, and Christine de Pizan, okay? So because they started writing in the popular language in the region, that started to appeal to more people, and more people are now starting to read. They didn't want to read before. They didn't have access to read before, okay? Now, because they're able to hear and understand the information that's being presented, now they're more curious. Now they want to know more, okay? And that's going to change a lot of things, as you'll see in a minute. All right, so question number 10 and 11. So this is Christine de Pizan. So if you have her for your project, so awesome. She is the woman of humanist literature, and she was an Italian humanist writer, or lyricist, or, you know, somebody that writes and authors books and various writings, okay? And she lived in France and wrote in French. So she literally wrote in the vernacular, the language that's spoken in that culture, okay? But she is best known for her works written for defense of women. We could call her the Renaissance feminist, okay? Because in her book, the book of the City of Ladies, she denounced many of the male writers, that male writers said, hey, you can't learn. As the nature of women, you can't learn. That's what male writers were saying during this time period, during the Renaissance. It was very hard for a woman during that time, okay? However, in her writings, she argued that women can attain learning just as great and just as good as any man if they are able to attain or obtain or attend the same schools. So she wrote about that in terms of her writing, and also how women can serve their husbands, and how they can serve themselves and be noble women in their community. So depending, because she was a noble woman, she wrote for a specific group of women, especially noble women in her community. So just keep that in mind as well, okay? All right, so this is your answer for number 12, 13, and 14, okay? So Dante Alighieri was the Italian author of the Divine Comedy. And how Dante Alighieri used vernacular Italian to contribute to the development of the language. He wrote the Divine Comedy in the classic language of Florence. So he used his native dialect, right, in Florence to write the Divine Comedy, okay? that native dialect that he wrote in Florence is now the language that is spoken in Italy today. So that's how much of an impact his masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, was, or is even, because now that is the actual language spoken in Italy today. Okay, so I guess it was so popular that people started to pick up that dialect, or it started to spread throughout Italy, and now that is the actual Italian language. So for question number 14, Dante argued that he needed to write in that vernacular of his Italian dialect, because if he wrote in Latin, he said only the scholars, only the upper echelons, those educators, the scholars, the noblemen, right? Only they would understand him. He said other people will not understand him if he wrote in just Latin. So that opened up again. This is opening up education and is opening up literature for everybody, not just the upper class of society, right? And that's going to be important, because that's what's going to revolutionize Europe. Okay, so let's continue. So number 15 is kind of, you're going to have to really dig deep into what I'm saying here, because it's a bit based on opinion, but also based on what you've learned here with the Divine Comedy. So this is a painting, and I forgot the artist. I'll find out and I'll try to put it in the notes. This is a painting of a representation of what this artist thought Dante's Inferno would look like. So in the Divine Comedy, Dante travels through various levels of hell, okay? And in this case, it's called the Inferno, okay? But he goes through hell and then goes through purgatory, and then he ends up in heaven, okay? However, in each tier, there's a punishment that fits the sin of that particular person. So it's very humanist judgment or humanist justice. It's very individualized punishment, okay? So for example, as I said here, Dante's hell is heresy. So anyone that was considered a heretic, meaning somebody that believes counter or against something, and particularly the church, right, or Christianity or what have you, and there were false teachers, he said that they will be spending eternity entombed in a flaming stone coffin. That means that they're going to lay in a coffin burning continuously, okay? And yes, it gets even more morbid. The last level is reserved for corrupt politicians, and those corrupt politicians, they meet a three-headed devil where that devil eats them alive. Yeah, it gets that morbid. So it's not pretty. And it's not a real comedy. That's, in that time period, a comedy was literally like somewhat of a satirical, or what we would call sarcastic tragedy. Okay, so keep that in mind. Even with Shakespeare may have had comedies, but it was really satirical or satire, or very thoughtful, or thought-provoking, sarcastic comedy, okay, that would make you really think, or even has some morbid text to it. So Dante travels through this hell, as you see here, but no one before Dante actually made themselves the main character in a long poem like this. So this was prolific for the time period of the Renaissance, or this time period that people were living in, because nobody actually saw a main character go through something like this for themselves. So that made this particular piece of literature very popular and very prolific. Okay, awesome. So based on that, you have to decide what you think Dante's views of the church would be based on this description of the Inferno. Okay. Hey historians, welcome back. This is the end of this particular section. I broke this up into 2 parts because of how entirely long it is. So this is still 5.2 for your guided notes. However, this is the ideas of the Renaissance, kind of focusing on the writers of the Renaissance and so forth. In the next video, which is the part 2, we'll be looking a little bit more into the artistic side of the Renaissance. Still a little bit of the writing, but more focusing on the art of the Renaissance. So again, make sure that you are still continuing with your 5.2 guided notes, and I will see you on the flip side.